Hey guys, so I thought I'd bring another rogue analysis video where I look at what rogue decks the top ranked players on Dueling Book are playing using data available from ygeoscope.com. So now that I've started creating tier list videos based on Dueling Book data, and you can find my most recent one for March in the description below, I can use this as a basis to look at which decks should and should not be included for this analysis. So essentially, I would be looking at excluding any decks that are in tier 1 or 2 listed here, which I can show more clearly here. Although, the one exception that I am going to make is that I am going to add Drytron as tier 2, even though it was identified as rogue based on the data, because I do think it still deserves some respect and is a good combo deck as long as DP Scythe is still a thing. I decided to still just stick with Dogmatic Invoked as rogue, even though that's definitely weird to say, but it's a deck that I'm personally playing myself at the moment, and I just really don't think that the deck is great right now, but I'm sure it will be back in its tier 1 status again sometime soon, but just not this format. So obviously the definition between rogue and tier 2 can be murky at times and it's not going to be perfect, but just know that any decks that are not listed here would be considered for this analysis. So based on 24 players ranked within the top 100, where each player can contribute at most 20 matches, just because ygeoscope.com only shows the 20 most recent replays, you see that these were the rogue decks played by the top players on Dueling Book, and so this pie chart is based on 344 matches. The most represented deck is surprisingly Evil Twin, which is something that has never made the top 5 before in my rogue analysis videos. Definitely a cool strategy now that Trouble Sunny is available post Purse of Destiny, allowing you to have a big body that can tag out and summon these smaller Evil Twin Link monsters. Then we have good old reliable dinosaurs, at one point a feared tier 1 strategy. It has returned to rogue status for quite some time now since the misc limit, but still a fan favorite deck. And then we have Heroes, and yes, I checked the replays and it's actually Heroes and not just any deck that uses DPE engine, which unfortunately just gets flagged as Hero a lot of times on YGOscope. Next is Infernoble, which pretty much always makes it as one of the most played rogue decks among the top ranked players anytime I do this video. Then we have Dogmatica Invoke, which I know many of you won't agree that it's a rogue deck and more so tier 2, but either way I think it will be back to meta contention very soon as it has been one of the most consistent decks ever. Next we have Mathmac, another cool rogue strategy that gets featured often in these videos. Then we had some Dragoon Turbo deck with a bunch of hand traps, pretty cool, and Dragoon is actually quite good right now, and with everyone running DPE, it's nice to have something that not only cannot get destroyed but forces them to have to use DPE's effect before it comes out, otherwise they will take some hefty burn damage. And then we have Thunder Dragons, piloted by Thunder Theory on YouTube, so make sure to check out his channel. Really cool to see that this deck can still do well competitively despite Colossus being banned. And then we have Ad Ignister, which is really popular rogue choice among the top ranked players for the last few months, with its aim to build a rival Ad Ignister for that giant tower-like monster that's unaffected by everything. We also have ABC, piloted by of course Pier555 to make ABC players proud, and we also had a small amount of Mystic Mind burn as well. Awful strategy, but I guess it can get some easy wins on Dueling Book. Lastly, we had some matches from other decks such as Orcus, Zodiac, and Yosenju among others. Now our players ranked within the top 100 that played a rogue deck won 63% of their matches, so certainly lower than the low 70s that you see among the top 25 ranked players as expected. As for playstyle, most rogue options were still combo decks such as Hero, Infernoble, and Ad Ignister. About a quarter of the matches involved mid-range strategies such as Dogmatica Invoke, and I also categorized Evil Twin as mid-range, but perhaps it should be classified as control. Let me know what you think. About 13% were control decks, such as that Dragoon Turbo deck that I mentioned, and lastly a small percentage of beatdown decks, which came from some of the Dino decks that were still a going second break my board strategy, but other Dino lists seem to be more of a going first combo type, which I categorized accordingly. Now let's cover the top 5 most played rogue decks in a bit more detail. Starting with Evil Twins, the top players won about 65% of the matches with this deck, so pretty impressive. The deck seems to be mixed with different engines. For example, I know some lists were using the Dogmatica package, and my own locals I've seen it being mixed with Sky Striker engine as well. So you have the Trouble Sunny that can tag out and bring the Evil Twin links for the pop and draw, and you typically have some form of back row or hand traps to slow your opponents down. Not to mention, Trouble Sunny is a big body, so they can deal some hefty damage as well when you account for the other 2 links that come out in the battle phase. When they won the die roll, they won 69% of their matches versus 59% of the matches when they lost the die roll. Now, among all players in the last 7 days, unfortunately I can't get this data for this deck on YGO because the site does not seem to be able to identify this deck. Hopefully they can update the site soon so that they can categorize this deck so we can get the proper numbers. Next we have Dinosaurs, which along with the Scrap Raptor that came out originally was supposed to be really good, but that was very short-lived because Mist got limited shortly after. Still, the top ranked players won 61% of the matches with this deck, which is solid. By die roll, they won 65% when they won the die roll versus 57% of their matches when they lost the die roll. Now traditionally, Dinos are a going second deck, but most of the replays included seem like they were going first list instead. Either way, they can set up at least Dolka and Ultimate Conductor going first, while going second, honestly Ultimate Conductor can just eat up everything and does not care about the Scythe lock. Among all players, Dinos were the 24th most played deck in the last 7 days, so not as popular as it once was, and the win percentage among all players was quite miserable at 46% as well. Then we have Heroes, and as I said earlier, this actually was pure Heroes being played and not just some other deck that ran a DPE engine. Overall, the top players piloting this deck won 66% of their matches, which is impressive. It's a fan favorite archetype that's always been a competitive rogue strategy, where Dark Law is a walking macrocosmos at a scarier level than something like Shen Shen, and the deck can deal a ton of damage on the clapback as well. By die roll, it did much better when they won the die roll at 84% versus just 50% when they lost the die roll. Keep in mind of the small sample size, of course. In the past, at least, a lot of hero builds actually opted to go second instead, as it can punch a lot of damage, so it's definitely formidable going first or second. Now, among all players in the last 7 days, unfortunately I can't reliably get these stats because so many other decks that run the DPE engine gets falsely categorized as just hero a lot on YGO, so using those numbers wouldn't be accurate. Guess we just have to wait for something in the DPE engine to get banned for me to reliably get these values again for heroes. Now we have Infernal Knights, which actually had a pretty bad time this month at just 55% win percentage among our top ranked players. I believe it still does hand loops through Cyframe Lord Omega, and it's a really cool looking archetype that I wish was not so revolved around hand looping. The deck won 70% of their matches when they won the die roll, but a miserable 35% of their matches when they lost the die roll, although of course keep in mind of these small sample sizes as always. Now among all players in the last 7 days, it was the 44th most played deck, so not very popular anymore, and this is something that you don't see often, but the win percentage of 64% among all players was actually much higher than what the top ranked players showcased. Now you may wonder how this could be possible, but I suspect it's because at the time that I collected the data, the Infernoble players I guess just had a bad losing streak going on, but still had enough points to be ranked in the top 100, so that might explain the difference in win percentage. Now you know how at the beginning of this video I said that Dogmatic Invoke just did not seem great right now? Well, at least among our top ranked players, they actually won 72% of the matches with the deck, so maybe it's just me that sucks with this deck. When they won the die roll, they won an impressive 81% of the matches versus 62% of the matches when they lost the die roll. Now traditionally, this deck has a pretty balanced win percentage based on die roll just because they play so many hand traps, so if we had a larger sample size, I suspect that this gap would be smaller. Now among all players in the last 7 days, it was the 13th most played deck, so pretty popular, although the win percentage was much lower at 57%. It is an easy deck to learn after all, so perhaps a lot of newer players might be running it and weighing the win percentage down, but either way, as I said earlier, I think the deck will be able to get back to its tier 1 status at some point, since it is a really consistent and reliable strategy. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's rogue analysis of the top ranked players. Hopefully this was useful in helping you decide the next rogue deck to play. Take care guys.